Hello, welcome to everyone who's joining us from across the country. Good afternoon to those on the West Coast, good evening to the East Coast, and welcome to the third in our series of online entrepreneurial webinars that we've been calling Amplify Online. My name is Josh Goldman. I'm a member of the Tufts class of 1988, computer science major in arts and sciences. Went on to start several companies and began my entrepreneurial career after business school, after Tufts. And I'm a member of the Tufts Entrepreneurship Center, the board of advisors. And we started this series of online events to take the place of our in-person big annual San Francisco event we started last year, which obviously isn't happening. After our last event, I was contacted by a talented Tufts entrepreneur who asked, said these were great, but is there a way we could feature some younger, more recent Tufts grads who are in the middle of their entrepreneurial journey to share some of their experiences? And I said, great idea, will you do it? And luckily, she said yes, she would. So with that, let me introduce Shreya Navatia. She'll give her own intro and get us started with the session.
Thank you so much, Josh. Hi everyone, my name is Shreya Navatia. I majored in computer science at Tufts and graduated in 2015. And then since then, I moved first out to Palo Alto and then San Francisco to work at a couple of really small startups in kind of the education HR space, and then a B2B SaaS company, now right back to education and HR. So I've had a variety of roles between operations, community, UX, and product. And I also started my own accelerator for female non-binary people called the Violet Society. And now I'm part of a kind of community/accelerator called On Deck, running operations with them. So I'm really excited to have Charles and McGill here today. We actually were basically acquaintances during undergrad and then reconnected in the Bay. And so I invited them here because I wanted to share a little bit of how you can get started in startups, a couple of different paths to building your first companies, and kind of talk about the resources in the Bay Area. So with that, I'd love to hand it off to Charles to tell you a little bit more about his background.
Great, thank you very much, Shreya. Yeah, so I guess the quick bio here, I graduated from Tufts in 2011, basically 100% sure that I was going to spend the first 10 years of my career working on energy in China. I'd studied quantitative economics, and I spoke pretty good Mandarin at that time. I went to Hong Kong on a Fulbright to look into energy usage in cities, and ended up working at Morgan Stanley as an analyst, which I still saw as kind of on that path as sort of a credentialing thing. And then one morning, woke up, checked my BlackBerry, and my entire life did a U-turn. I had a friend who had started a venture-backed company in San Francisco, an e-commerce company, and he invited me to join them as a director. So they were selling, buying and selling used clothing, and I came on as sort of was the director of operations, COO for them. Grew the team there to 250 people. We raised $20 million from some top VCs, including Andreessen Horowitz. And then were acquired by eBay in 2015. And then I subsequently co-founded, bootstrapped a B2B logistics SaaS company called Galleon, which is still operating. I am not involved sort of in the day-to-day operations there anymore. We have a good team running it. And in the last couple of years have been doing more some investing and also starting to work on a new community for direct-to-consumer e-commerce logistics people called StartOps. So happy to talk about any of that, and there's also lots of stuff that's kind of been off the map there as well. So looking forward to this conversation. And would love to hand it over to McGill for his intro.
Cool, thank you. So I joined, I came to Tufts in 2010, and I was really set on actually being an international relations major. I thought I was going to go into diplomacy. I took a computer science course kind of on a whim to get a math credit, and I just ended up really falling in love with coding and development. Around my senior year, I was really interested in just getting more hands-on work, and I similarly had a friend who kind of reached out with a startup idea that he was working on, and he really needed some, technical support. So I joined as a kind of CTO, technical co-founder, and for a company. It was called Guide Hire. It was really fun. It was kind of like a booking. It was like an Airbnb for booking outdoor guides. So I worked on that for about a year. We raised a small amount of money before basically winding that down. At that point, I joined a startup out in San Francisco, and I moved from Boston to San Francisco in 2015. A startup called Peer, that was a enterprise HR company started by the former COO of Salesforce, a guy named George Hu. I spent about a year working there, a little less than that, before that company was acqui-hired by Twitter. I spent a year at Twitter, kind of working on working on the back-end team for the direct message product, before leaving almost exactly 3 years ago to found my second company, which was called HumbleDot, as a manager tool for keeping teams aligned and checking in on your direct reports. Spent the last 3 years working on that, and we made the tough call to actually wind that down. We'll be shutting down the company and the product on Friday, actually. And I'm now just starting work on a new company with my same co-founder from HumbleDot called Rise, which is a work journal for software developers.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. And to everyone watching, just a quick overview of the way this is going to go. I have some questions talking about kind of startup journeys, recruiting, fundraising, building, all of the classic questions that I think would be helpful for first and second time founders. But please drop some more questions in the Q&A. We'd love to touch on your questions and dig into anything that you really want to hear about. But to start, I'd love to hear a little bit more from each of you. Were there any Tufts affiliated resources, classes, clubs, anything that really got you into startups or got you started on this journey?
I can jump in. I would say that the CS professors, a huge shout out to my CS professors, like Ben Hescott in particular, was hugely supportive in getting me excited and involved in development. And that's, there's so many different pathways and journeys into entrepreneurship, but mine really came through that kind of technical and product side. And so the other professor was Ming Chow, who is like very well known, and his classes really got me excited about building products and allowed me to really believe that I could make something that other people would use. And then I would also say this isn't necessarily a Tufts resource, but just being so close to the city of Boston and Cambridge and all these other schools. I mean, a lot of my early experience in the entrepreneur space was just working for startups in Cambridge, because there were so many of them, or working with other students from even other universities or hackathons. So I would plug those.
Yeah, and I think for me, so it's really interesting. I was a quant econ major, but the reason I chose that as a major is because it was basically the mathiest thing I thought I could do and still graduate. I actually came into Tufts hating math and being really scared of it, and I sort of took that on as a bit of a personal challenge. And it was quite a bumpy journey, getting from where I was with math to the point of being able to graduate. But I think that sort of financial knowledge then really gave me the confidence to go and take on some of the roles that I've taken on. And also just to be able to learn about these kinds of things quickly. There was one point at Twice where I realized that our accountants had been doing our books wrong, and we needed to prepare them again for part of a venture debt raise. And I basically went into a closet for 2 weeks, taught myself accounting, redid the books, and I definitely don't think that would have been possible without Tufts, the Tufts education and some of the rigor that we had in our quant econ classes.
That's awesome. And if there's any students watching, I wanted to add a couple more plugs kind of related to McGill's answer about like the Boston general tech scene and community. As an undergrad, I was going to a lot of just like different tech meetups and events. Obviously during COVID, the in-person stuff is a little bit different, but hopefully in the future when these come back. One of the things that I really loved was hackathons, because then you'd meet people from other schools, you'd build stuff. you built a project in just a weekend, you could add that to your resume. And after like 3 weekends, it would make your resume look really good before you got any other kind of internship or startup experience. So I would definitely recommend looking into those because it's a great way to learn. And kind of along those lines, for the next question, I'd love to hear more about why both of you decided to come out to the Bay Area. What do you think were the differences between the Boston community and the Bay Area community? What drew you out here?
Yeah, so for me, the choice was not so much between the Boston area and San Francisco as it was between Hong Kong and San Francisco. And there was a very interesting and vibrant startup scene in Hong Kong at the time, which I had sort of tapped into during my time there. Long story, but at one point was starting a company to import craft beer and considered LBOing a beer brewery with one of my finance friends. But I think, you know, San Francisco, there's just an energy and a spirit of entrepreneurship there that is not just, you know, not necessarily found in Boston, but is not found anywhere else in the world, I think. And I think there is more and more of that energy being found in other places, and there are great communities that are global now that provide that. But especially back in 2012, it was still kind of the center of the universe for startups.
Yeah, I would say similarly, like add on to what Charles said. I mean, when back in 2015, when I was looking at the landscape, I would say first I did spend about a year in Boston working on my first startup guide hire. And there were some really, I would say at that time, this might have changed in 5 years, but there were some really stark differences, especially in the investor scene. I mean, Boston investors tended to be just generally a little more conservative, more comfortable with pharmaceuticals and like hardware and robotics in general. And you had just such a high proliferation of classic venture firms doing software investments. They were much more comfortable at this early stage with young founders. And like, I definitely experienced that firsthand trying to raise money. And then the other aspect was what really brought me out there was a job initially. I was kind of looking between New York and SF. And I just, at the time, I was really just looking to work with the best engineers and product people that I could find. And as I was going through these interviews at these different opportunities, it seemed that all of the best teams that I was encountering and most exciting products were all coming out of San Francisco at that time. I would say though, like just that is changing. I mean, I think COVID has changed that, is that, I think actually remote and distributed teams tend to be really, there's so many really exciting products coming out from so many different places, or like a distributed team. So I don't know how true it is as it was 5 years ago, but that was the case for me then.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I'd love to now dig into kind of each of your personal experiences, and I have a few questions for each of you. So Charles, so you started off as a Fulbright scholar. As you said, you didn't necessarily expect to get into tech and startups. How did you ramp up really quickly and learn everything you needed to know to be a value add to the team?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, for better or for worse, a lot of it for my situation was just kind of being thrown in the deep end. Within 3 months of joining, I sort of originally joined to take on more of a finance role. Within 3 months of joining, it was clear that we actually needed a COO. And so I went from, facing mostly a desk and a spreadsheet to expanding to include basically warehouse operations and, anything from learning how to hire hourly workers, set up, actual like factory grade logistics, do real estate deals, all this. And I think that's one of the sort of exciting things about joining an early stage company is, if you do, you often get like a lot more latitude to learn and experiment through your own experience. Now, was that the best thing for the company? Always? Probably not. There were a lot of things that I did wrong or could have done more efficiently if I'd done them before. But I think especially, pre like Series A, I guess, you often have people kind of having to wear many hats. And so joining a company at that stage is really exciting because you do just get to learn by doing. And I was fortunate to have a team that was supportive in that and was willing to kind of work with me through the things that were difficult.
Awesome. And digging into Twice too, so Twice was acquired by eBay. Could you tell us a little bit more about the acquisition process and what you would recommend to founders who may be getting acquired, may get some offers? Did you have other offers that you guys were deciding between? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, we were approached by a couple of different folks around the same time. eBay felt like a really natural fit because, you know, we were doing in a sort of more scalable, systematic way, you know, what they've been doing from the beginning of the game. So I think that it was pretty clear from the beginning that's kind of who we were going to be sort of working with. I'd say, you know, every acquisition, every deal goes down a little bit differently. It happens for different reasons. It's very much dependent on, you know, who at the company is trying to acquire you and what they're trying to acquire you for. I would say that dealing with a company that was so much larger, you know, Twice at the time, I think was about 300 people. There was a lot of information asymmetry. So, you know, they hold all the cards. You know, their internal stakeholders are not necessarily always aligned. You might have different people within an org that want your company for different reasons. You also sometimes have situations where people want parts of the company, but don't necessarily want to be responsible for, you know, integrating it. And so I think when we did join, you had sort of a pretty classic situation evolve where the process of trying to take, you know, this very scrappy growth focused startup and integrate it with like the giant machinations of eBay's sort of internal workings was bumpy. And you know, I think for me personally, I didn't actually stay on too long after the acquisition because I was in my late 20s and I was like, I could do this, and I'm, you know, being incentivized to do this very strongly, but for my time and for the excitement, like I just can't be going out and spending nights alone in a hotel room in Indiana. So that was kind of the way it went down. But again, I think there's no one size fits all answer to that question.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone is very, very different. So after Twice, for the next company that you worked on, Galleon, decided to bootstrap instead of raising venture capital. Would love to hear, how did you make this decision? How do you think that the growth process felt different? And how did it change your decision making in the company?
Yeah. So I started Galleon with the CTO from Twice. So we had a long experience working together. We had actually built a warehouse management system together. So had a good amount of sort of experience working together on product. We didn't actually so much decide to bootstrap as like try to buy an option on how the company would grow. We had found this area to work on in the sort of logistics space. Galleon, by the way, the company you drop your, if you're an e-commerce company and you're spending millions of dollars with UPS and FedEx and DHL, you can plug into Galleon and we'll basically programmatically save you money in a variety of different ways. So, you know, we had people we could talk to about whether this was something that was going to be valuable. So our customer base was pretty well vetted. What we didn't really know was how big the opportunity was or how fast it could possibly grow. So we went out, we built the product for a couple of early customers. We were immediately profitable, which was, you know, it was good. It helped us keep the lights on. And then we had sort of a decision to make about how to grow it. And, you know, I think that not every business is venture backable. And it takes, you know, it takes some sort of soul searching to figure out if you want to, once you commit to taking on VC, you are committing to a path where your growth targets are set and you know, it's either grow or die. And we had that at Twice. And I think that for Twice, it was probably the right move, but it also actually did, I think, force some sort of suboptimal outcomes in terms of how we built our operations, right? Operational businesses are really hard to build at that kind of speed. So we built Galleon. We started out bootstrapping with the thought that like, if it were to work well, we could go then raise money. We eventually decided that it was doing great as a bootstrap business. And so just sort of continued on that line.
Yeah, nice. I think that that's an especially valuable perspective because especially when you first move to the Bay, it definitely seems like just raising is the shiny thing, regardless of why or how, or if it really makes sense for your company. So another thing that I'd love to ask about Galleon, you mentioned that you decided to hire mostly contractors rather than build out a huge, expensive full-time team. So how did you find those people and vet them? And how did you think that experience was different than a lot of full-timers?
Yeah, so just for context, as we grew Galleon, we would come to points where we would onboard a certain number of customers, and it would look like we were going to need to hire someone. And our strategy was always basically to try to find contractors to do that work in the short term, and then build automation in the back end to make it scalable. And as a result, we were able to scale the company to a pretty large size, while really mainly only maintaining myself and my co-founder on payroll. The thing motivating that was really basically just that when you're bootstrapping the business, any dollar that you spend is money that you don't get to make for yourself. And so fortunately, Calvin was also a very good engineer, so we were able to sort of tackle a lot of these problems. It was definitely a less fun experience than Twice. Bootstrapping is just a total grind. Everything takes 10 times as long, and it's really, you lose the energy that you have from having a team. And when I was at Twice, I loved having a team around me to bounce ideas off of, and so it really was a sacrifice in that sense. But I think that just given the profile of the business and what we had sort of committed to, it was also what made the most sense for us.
And I'd love to talk about kind of the current things that you're working on. So can you tell us more about StartOps and how you had this idea based on your past experiences?
Yeah, so there's a really interesting trend happening right now, I think. I don't really have a good name for it, but I'll just call it sort of community-driven startups. Basically these are companies where things sort of emerge organically from a community of people. And so one of the things I realized while I was doing sales at Galleon is that, I was talking to the heads of all of these direct-to-consumer e-commerce companies, and we serviced, if you sort of name a popular D2C brand, like they were likely a Galleon customer. It was really our sweet spot. So there's all these great people, but they were all asking like me for advice on things and connections. And when I looked on LinkedIn, I was rarely sharing more than 2 or 3 connections with folks. So StartOps is a community, is starting out as a knowledge sharing community for operators and logistics companies now, or in D2C companies. Now, I think these types of communities exist all over. There are all kinds of niches where you have experts. They should be talking to each other. There's no clearinghouse for the information that's in their heads. There's no way for them to meet each other. And so this is sort of an experiment in that. And one of the great things about having a community is that most startups fail because they're not servicing an actual need. Someone has an idea for a product, they try and vet it, they build it out, turns out wasn't as big as a need as they thought. With the community, your customers are already there. They are the business in a way. And so when you want to decide what to build, you can just ask them. And that helps you build a much faster sort of learning engine than I think you're ordinarily able to if you're relying on things like user interviews or even direct experience in some sense, right? Depending on your industry, you might only be seeing a small part of a bigger picture. So right now it's just a small group, but we're trying to listen to them and build what they might want from there, and we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm not sure if I mentioned the name of it earlier, but shameless plug for On Deck. It's beyonddeck.com, which is where I work now. I'm really interested in this coming wave of community-focused startups and organizations, because I think that the relationship between all of the community members is so much deeper than that of just customers. Like you said, Charles, like these can be the people who are your initial user tests, are your initial sales, who you're constantly learning from, getting feedback from, and improving the product. So I think that's awesome. And the other thing that you're working on now is Pascal Capital. So now that you're on the investing side, how has that kind of changed your perspective? Do you feel, I feel like there's a constant debate in the Valley that's like, the only way you can be a great VC is if you've started a company yourself before. You must have that experience to be a great investor. What do you think about that?
Yeah, So working with Pascal has really been an eye-opening experience. I think, first of all, as an operator, as sort of like a very hardcore startup operator, especially at Twice, I was always a little bit skeptical of the work of the VC because, there I was like, sweating in a hot warehouse, like trying to wrangle 100 people for a shift, and they could be just sort of cutting checks. But this has really changed my perspective on it because there are just a lot of companies out there, and it's actually really quite hard to tell which ones are going to do well. I also was kind of forced to begrudgingly admit that I think you actually can be a good investor without necessarily having been an operator, and that really depends on the space. And I think it has been really helpful for me to have an ops experience, like vetting companies where they're trying to tell you they can bite off a certain amount with a certain amount of capital, and just making sort of a gut check on like, okay, are you really going to do that? But I do think that there's a lot of a lot of startups don't fail because of their ops. In fact, I would say a lot fewer fail because of their ops than I would have cared to admit previously. Maybe for e-commerce it's like a little bit different, but I think a lot of the time things fail because they don't have the right team, or they're not working on the right problem, and a variety of other reasons. But I think ops really only starts to matter kind of post Series B, and so I think if you have a really good, if you're a good like big picture thinker, you have a good financial background, you know the right questions to ask. You don't necessarily have to have run a company, but I think it does help.
Totally. Thanks so much, Charles, for telling us so much more about your experience. Miguel, I'd love to turn it over to you. So tell us about Guide Hire. So since you started that, it looks like during undergrad, especially for the students on the line, I'm sure they'd love to hear what it's like to be kind of a student founder and be a resource magnet.
Yeah, so I guess the background with Guide Hire was I committed to being a CS major, and I was so eager to just start building product. And I was in all these math classes. Like I was trying to finish my CS degree, but it felt like I was just taking math courses and I wasn't actually building anything. So I was just really eager to be like, build a website or build an app or build something that, I could use or others could use. And I had a friend that I grew up with reach out to me about this concept that he had been working on. And it was about hiring outdoor guides, which was really, it wasn't my area of expertise. I'm from New York. Like I'm not really a fly fisherman, which ended up being kind of our bread and butter. Like that was where we actually kind of had the most product market fit. So I didn't have a huge connection with the problem, but I was just so eager to build a website and that real people would use. And so I just kind of dove head in. I didn't really have much experience, and I think it was one of the best decisions that I could have made. I learned, built the site with Rails, and a lot of it was just self-taught. I mean, a lot of it was just, following tutorials online. I had been working with some startups as well, kind of interning with the various startups in Cambridge. So they helped me a lot. Other engineers that I've been working with there. Also, Ming, I definitely came to him with a few questions that he helped answer back in the day. But I think, it was great because I made every mistake. We made every single mistake that you can make, I think on the company side, but personally on the product side as well. There were no tests. It just broke every single rule that you could have, which is good because now you really internalize why you do those best practices in the first place. Yeah, that was kind of like my experience with Guide Hire, and it ended up just becoming something that sort of just sucked me in. We launched the site, we ended up getting a handful of users, and we ended up raising a small amount of money. It was really hard, I would say, to work on that and be in school at the same time. I think my grades suffered. And I once we raised some money, I actually dropped out of that spring semester just to focus on it. So I think it's really difficult to do both at the same time, but it started as just this fun side project that I kind of ended up sort of sucking me in.
Totally. So, and I'd also love to hear, as you said, you raised a bit of money. I'm sure that the students are familiar, if you've looked into venture capital, everything kind of says, oh, if you're raising for the first time, get warm intros. And it's like, well, who am I going to get warm intros from if this is the first time? How did you connect with those first investors and develop a relationship and make a good impression?
Yeah. So fundraising was really, really difficult for Guide Hire. We ended up raising a very small amount. Luckily, we were still on such a student budget. It got us through the summer and that spring, but it was really hard. I mean, we went through I think there are more opportunities now, but we just got turned down from every single VC firm. We probably botched every pitch. I mean, again, we made every mistake that you could make. I won't lie. It was really hard. I think we ended up taking some investment, not even from venture firms, from a couple family offices. That ended up, I wouldn't actually recommend that. It ended up being a lot more work probably than, it was than benefit, because they just weren't they were accustomed with venture investments, and they required a lot from us, didn't really understand the whole process. So that was kind of a tough choice, but I think all of those failures really influenced the experience of raising money for HumbleDot. So for HumbleDot, we raised a 500K pre-seed and then a 2.6 million seed round in 2018. And I learned a ton from those raised experiences as well. But I think, just going back to your original question for Guide Hire, the first time, it's really difficult. I think that building on your network, if you have some work experience, that can be really helpful. That's what helped me with HumbleDot, and using those work connections. But more than anything, I would say, especially if you're a first-time founder, building the product and getting users is the most helpful thing you can do. Because those numbers, like having a product that people can play with, having users and charts that you can show that there's being usage, I mean, that's really going to be the number one thing that you can do. And if you get enough of users, investors will follow from that.
Totally. And and speaking of kind of that transition from first startup to second startup, clearly, like, of course, after trying to build something, getting a little bit of work experience is helpful. So you see this outside perspective and how another person runs a company. What lessons did you learn from your software engineering roles between Guide Hire and HumbleDot that helped you become a better founder that second time around?
Oh yeah, so much. So kind of my whole process was, after about a year of working on HumbleDot, I felt that we pretty much had failed to raise more than that initial amount from some family offices, and the company was kind of up in the air. It wasn't, as I mentioned, I wasn't passionate about the mission of the company. It didn't connect with me personally. So what I was really looking for was, just an opportunity to work with a great team. So after building this product for a year on my own, I felt like my learning was sort of plateauing as well on the technical side. So what I really was searching for was, okay, I just want to work with a group of engineers and product people that are really, really talented. That's what led me to Peer. And Peer was just this, it was only 13, I was the last hire of Peer, and almost everybody else was a experienced software engineer. That's actually where I met my HumbleDot co-founder. And that was such a valuable experience, because coming from, again, doing everything wrong on the technical side, this was kind of seeing how things are done right. And I learned so much about basically how to build product correctly, how to ship, especially early on, ship things quickly, in the proper way, where your bases are a little bit more covered. And then I would say, this was after the acquisition to Twitter, I learned a lot about working, once I joined Twitter. I think where the learning came in there was just about how these systems operate at scale on an engineering side, which was a really awesome and valuable experience. But, I would say, like, from learning perspective, it was really just because we had failed in every way that you could have. I would say you just learn from experience. I mean, there's so many great resources out there, And I think honestly, like we made every mistake. And so you learn from that. And building out the network of really smart and talented people was probably one of the most valuable things, in addition to just having those experiences that I can say towards once like joining a company after a startup.
Totally. And so you said that you met your co-founder through the company that you were both at Peer and Twitter. And so how did you make those first couple of hires beyond the founding team? How did you source them? And then what was that process?
Yeah, it was, so I met my co-founder, at Peer. We just got along really well. And once we left, we raised a small round. The first hire that we really wanted to make, we had built this product and we had about, a handful of teams using it. But what we knew, our entire experience had really been on the growth, on the product side. We had been engineers at Twitter and Peer before that. But where we knew we really had a blind spot was on growth and like sales and marketing. So we knew we wanted to hire someone with experience, and we kind of didn't even know where to start. I mean, it was such a blind spot for us. I remember just looking through my network of actually kids I went to Tufts with. There's a bunch of people I met with from Tufts, and I actually just got coffee with them. And it's like, can you just tell me about what marketing means, or like, what does a salesperson do? Because I had no insight into that. And after meeting with people, talking with our investors as well, we were able to shape an initial kind of role of what we were looking for. We then just started reaching out to people on LinkedIn, and we got really lucky because one of the first people that we reached out to on LinkedIn was this really experienced woman. She had run multiple sales and marketing teams, Quantcast and Crowdflower. And she set up a meeting with us. She's told us after the fact that she was like, yeah, I was not planning on joining this startup at all. This was a warm-up meeting. But she sat down with us and we just had like a really great connection. She had such a wealth of such a vast amount of knowledge of marketing and sales. Her interview was actually like her giving us a lesson on the entire sales and marketing pipeline. She was up on the whiteboard, it's like marking things away. So we knew immediately that we really wanted her to join the team. And she had managed budget, $1 million budgets, managed teams of 40, 50 people. So she also brought in some of that management experience too. And so she was that key first hire, I'd say. And she really helped us kind of grow the team from there. After that, she led the process of building out the growth team, and then we hired a couple more designers and engineers, again, initially from our network, and then also using things like LinkedIn and AngelList, stuff like that.
Totally. And last question for you before we move into some Q&A. There's been some great questions already, but if you have any more, please ask them, and I'll kind of blend them into some other questions that we have. But yeah, for McGill, last question for you. So like you said, like your founding team's strength was in product. What would you say are signals to listen to help you decide when you should pivot or when something's just not working entirely?
That's a good question. I think honestly, with HumbleDot, I wish we had put more thought into this first. I think a lot of what Charles was saying really resonates about his current startup. I think you really just want to, if you want to find a problem, just start with a demographic or a community or space. Just talk to people from that space. Talk to as many as you can, and you'll see, what people want. Like what are their problems? What are their pain points? If you talk to enough people, that will show up. And if you just build towards solving that problem, you'll reach at least some kind of level of success. I think with HumbleDot, we didn't do that. We started building a product that we wanted for our teams and that we felt that we needed. And we kind of got lucky in the sense that, there were a lot of other teams that wanted to use this product as well. But getting those first handful of users is also really difficult. But I would say just kind of go out and initially cast a really wide net. Talk to people, see who's willing to use this, because especially those, depending on what you're building, the people who are most willing to use that initial MVP are generally the people that have that problem the most. And so you can kind of start with that 1 or 2 users and start to build a kind of like an ideal customer profile of, you know, who you should target. And then once you have that, you can kind of find that in a repeatable sense.
Just to piggyback on that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, you go ahead. Sorry.
For Galleon, one of the sort of signals that we had found something worth working on was that our first customer invited us to come and sit in their office with them and build it there, which was both immensely valuable in terms of closing the loop on the feedback that we were getting on the product, and also saved us a lot on rent. But I think like it's not always a good idea to embed, because you know you might end up just building something custom for one company, but because of the situation and the type of product we were building, you know, that was something we were able to avoid. And yeah, just that gets back to your point. It's like it was so valuable just to have a customer there on hand to talk to.
And yeah, the other thing I would say, and again, we didn't necessarily do this with HumbleDot, but this is what I would recommend, is just really try and hammer what problem are you solving and for who. If you can really like pick an ideal customer profile and be clear in the value prop you're providing, then you know where those people hang out. You know what communities they're already in. And those are great places to go to get more users like that. And so I think like that's one of the most valuable things you can do even before you start, definitely before you start building product, is just really work on market and like what's the value prop and who are we going after, because that's really, really important work to do upfront.
Thanks so much. So let's move into Q&A. There's been some awesome questions from the audience. The first one that I'd love to start with is, what are some recommendations for aspiring entrepreneurs who are not good at computer science and might not fit into the software engineering role, from an IR major, class of 22? I'd love to take a stab at that first, because although I did major in computer science, I kind of like ground my way through it. I was not necessarily passionate about software engineering, but I enjoyed math. And nowadays, the skills that I use the most are just writing and speaking and attention to detail in these really non-technical roles in operations and community. I think that one thing that I would recommend is, if you want to be a founder, but you're not going to be building out a software product, and yet you still want to build a software company, kind of this built on what McGill just said about markets, but learn a lot about the industry that you're curious about. If you can try and sell something online, if you can try and build a community or following of people, maybe from a podcast or a newsletter about that industry, I think that one of the strongest co-founding teams is an expert in a vertical with a technical builder who can build the product, because then you have both of those really strong perspectives. Somebody has all of the context and somebody else has all of the kind of like hands-on skill to make it happen. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I don't want to repeat too much of what you said, because I think it was dead on. But you know, I guess first of all, like, just read the mom test, read the lean startup, both really useful. You know, with a startup, to kind of echoing again what McGill was saying, like the point is to find people who are willing to buy something. And so that means if you're trying to go from 0 to 1 as a non-technical founder, you need to be good at understanding systems, getting information from people, getting people to talk to you, sales. And then there are also just an immense number of tools now that help non-technical people prototype. You know, Bubble, Adalo, Webflow, like there are so many great tools where you can now put up, you know, there's still a bit of a learning curve for these things, but you can now put up a site or sometimes a fully functioning web app that allow you to prove your point, allow you to prove that there's someone out there who wants what you're building and ideally is willing to pay money for it. And once you have that, you're actually in a great position. I think that there's been a huge proliferation of entrepreneurs, you know, over the last 10 years, and a shocking number of people are really, you know, technical and non-technical, are really looking for the right problem and looking for the right customer. In some ways, you know, if you want to do something in like deep tech or AI, like, okay, yes, you need an engineering degree and a lot of experience. But if you're just looking to build software that helps a business do something, or even that helps just a consumer do something, you can start without really any of those kinds of skills. And then once you have traction, it's much easier to get everything. It's easier to get employees, it's easier to get co-founders, it's easier to get investors. So just focusing on solving the initial pain point in search of traction.
Yeah, I would second everything both of you guys said. I mean, I think basically, it's one of these interesting things where having a technical background, it can be really important right at the beginning. But once you get some success or raise some money, it actually becomes a commodity. You can hire engineers to build these things. And then a lot of what becomes really important as a founder is outside of the technical scope. And so I would say, yeah, there's so many paths for entrepreneurship and there's so many skills. And what Charles was saying, there's so many amazing no or low code tools that are coming out now that I think this is probably the best time to be a non-technical founder or entrepreneur, because things are really, I think, moving away from needing that really hard technical background, especially for just providing a great service to businesses.
Thanks so much. One question that I think is really interesting, because this is just really practical. Someone asked, how do you handle concerns about your own financial security while you make the jump to founding? I feel like this is definitely something that people don't talk about enough, because they just act like the money appears. But obviously we all have to pay our rent and bills while we're starting something new. So what would you guys say about that?
Go ahead, Miguel.
Okay. I think this is really challenging. This is this is one benefit potentially of, going to, at least if you're working in the engineering space, there's software development. There's a benefit, and I felt this of kind of going and getting a job. I would say personally, going through that Twitter acquisition really was helpful for me to put some money aside and feeling more comfortable, leaving that job with that little nest egg that I'd saved through that experience to start Humbledot. But I think it's still difficult. I mean, this is another reason why it's kind of a benefit of starting while you're still in school, because you have a lot of things that are paid for, like your dorm or your paid for, or you're already paying for them via loan, dorm or food and stuff. And there's tons of resources that Tufts can provide. But I think it's really hard. I mean, the other thing is, like, when we started Humbledot, we were doing it in our free time. I mean, the first 6 months of working on Humbledot, we were working weekends and weeknights and pretty much all weekends. And it was really hard. I mean, because like the last thing that you want to do after a full work day of coding is go home and like code more. We did it for about 6 months, and we were like, I don't think we could do another month of this, because it was just straining our work so much. It was a really hard decision, and it was a really tough period to work through, in my experience.
I think, right, money doesn't come out of nowhere. And there is often this very awkward gap, I think, for a lot of people between where they're doing their nights and weekends thing and they can raise money, right? Most VCs won't fund you unless you're working on the project full time. So sort of like the elephant in the room there, like, what do you do in the in-between time? I think the one thing I'll put on this, so first of all, I think working for a company first is a great idea. We sort of lionize this college dropout startup founder sort of archetype. And I actually think that, especially now, a lot of the great founders are, as I think Shreya was saying, are industry experts. They have the unique resources, insight on a problem that most people can't even see, and least of all a college student. So I do think that it's good to be able to get some glimmer of that before you commit to working on something, and thus are able to sort of put aside some money, to take your leap. The other thing I will say is that, once you have that, I think being a founder, whether or not your startup succeeds, and at least in the Valley, having made the attempt is actually a very positive thing. So, you know, at Twice, we hired a director of marketing off of her failed startup. And it was actually, you know, something that differentiated her. It was a reason that we knew she was going to do an awesome job, is because she had the experience of starting a company and owning something. And I think that in the right markets, making the leap, even if you run out of runway and aren't able to raise, making the leap actually improves your prospects job-wise, you know, after the experience. So it's obviously not true across the board, but I guess just some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm kind of building on what they both said. I think I also started my company, the Violet Society, on the side while I had a full-time job. And it just happened to be a full-time job that was kind of chill enough that I had enough energy left to do that. It's not always possible. There's definitely the jobs where you're like 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. every day, a little bit on weekends, like kind of dying. But if you can find something like that, kind of McGill was saying, like the Bay Area, if you're not familiar with this, like Bay Area salaries are pretty commonly 6 figures for very early career people in technical roles or in leadership positions. And so if you can get up to that stage, and that allows you to put aside money and save up. I had saved up like 9 months of living expenses after moving in with a friend so that we could have a lower rent. And then I also had a path towards making enough money on my startup within about 5 or 6 months. So there's like buffer time there before I left my full-time role to do my startup full-time. And so it's not easy. Obviously, like depending on how many loans you have, it's going to be more difficult. And I don't think that people talk about this enough, because it does make it harder for entrepreneurship to be accessible to a lot of people. One option is also applying to an accelerator like Y Combinator, 500 Startups, or Techstars. You can apply while you haven't quit your job, and then once you get accepted, then you can quit and get that money. That's kind of one of the options that's different than like traditional venture, where traditional venture you won't be able to raise if it's a side project. So that might be an option too. I really love this next question, so wanted to dig into this one. How did either of you find trusted mentors or advisors who you could be fully honest with? So there's always ups and downs in startups, but it's when you first have an advisor, this is a person who you really respect and trust. You don't want to make a fool of yourself in front of them. So how do you find those people, first of all? And then second of all, how do you build a relationship such that you can talk about things that you mess up without feeling like you let them down?
So I think first, I can totally relate to this question. I think also this is an important distinction sometimes between advisors and investors too. Like when you know, generally investors, you sell part of the company, they're invested in your, you know, the financial success. And with advisors, you just grant them some level of ownership, some level of stock for just their input. And so they're just involved to give you their honest opinion, and that's like, and give you honest feedback. And so I think it's really important to have both of those roles, and generally you can find advisors more easily. But how to build that up, I would say personally, and this kind of ties into the network as a whole, but it's just go out and do things. Like go out and go to hackathons, go and intern at companies, go and build out your work network by, you know, finding a great job. I mean, so many of my initial advisors and network were just from working relationships, you know, whether they be from any of those previous examples I've given. Personally, I don't love networking, you know, going to network events and meeting people. I don't think anybody really does. It feels very transactional, and those relationships aren't real. They're not real. You don't really get to learn someone or build a strong relationship by, you know, meeting them and sharing a soda. But when you work on something together, even if it's just a hackathon, you really do get to know someone a lot better. And those are the people that you can potentially, you know, either, you know, have them join as advisors or get them involved that way. But if there's someone who is going to be advising your company that's kind of like a domain expert. I would say for us, it was really helpful was to build that relationship so that you can reach that level of comfort with them. Like we would go out and get meals with them and make sure that you check in on them consistently and hold them to meeting once a month, because that was another thing is sometimes people take on advisors, but then, you fail to really take advantage of having them, advising you. You don't really reach out enough. So yeah, be sure to actually follow up and reach out to these people once they make that commitment to advise you.
Yeah, thanks, Miguel. I don't have too much to add to that. I think there are lots of different flavors of advisors, kind of as you were alluding to. There were folks at Twice who were big shots at Amazon and Walmart and Jet, who I could probably reach out to once, maybe twice a year, with very specific, well-prepared questions, and they would help me. And those intros came like through our investor network. There's also, you need emotional support going through this, and I often get that from peers. And especially in San Francisco, I feel like founders are often happy to talk to other founders. It's easy to bond over the startup struggle. So it's kind of a hard thing to answer in the general case. But yeah, I think just recognizing that different people play different roles, and you have to find those people in different places is important.
I want to add quickly, if you're really interested in building a big network, you can always use the excuse, which is that you're running a blog or a podcast, or you're building a community, or you're hosting events. Amazing excuse to reach higher profile people that you feel like you have no business talking to. I feel like as McGill, I totally get the nobody likes networking, but I'm kind of the person who likes networking. And so I did want to share a little plug for that. I mean, typical networking events are pretty boring, but building relationships with smart, interesting people is always a good time. I'd love to wrap it up. We have only a couple minutes left with just one parting sentence of what's something that you know now that you wish you knew when you first started the entrepreneurship process.
All right, I'm going to cheat and just do two really quickly. One is, don't underestimate the power of compounding in your career. The longer you spend doing something, the more people you're going to know, the more industry expertise you're going to have. And so it's that stuff takes time to build up, and there's no way I could be doing StartOps right now if I hadn't spent the last 8 years talking to e-commerce people and have those people in my network already. I guess the sort of flip side of that is compounding does have a tendency to keep you in what you're doing. And so it's really important to find something that you genuinely care about. It's really hard to switch. Well, I guess have found every time I try to do something outside of D2C e-commerce, the universe somehow pulls me back into it, because that's where all my momentum is. And so it's a double-edged sword, and make sure when you pick something to do that it's something you really get, it gets you up in the morning and you deeply care about it.
Yeah, this is a hard question. I would say I think it kind of relates to what Charles is saying as well, in the sense that from my experience, it's just go out and try things and do things and get that experience, because that's how you will learn. That's how you will grow your network. Even if you don't feel like you won't have the experience, right? But just take that leap into the deep end. And even if things don't work out on the surface, you'll learn something new. You'll learn something that you like to do, maybe something that you hate to do. You might meet somebody, and you never know what path your journey is going to be. So just get out there and try things, try to build things, meet people, take these different opportunities. And it's okay if things don't work out or you don't feel prepared. Just go out and do it.
Awesome. I want to totally reiterate that. I think nobody's stopping you. There's no application process to launch on Product Hunt or share something on Twitter. If you have an idea, stop asking people, should I make this? What do you think of this? And just try something. Try that kind of ugly MVP and put it out there. I wanted to thank Charles and McGill. Thank you so much for your time, for joining us, for these awesome answers and insights. Thank you, Josh and Amy and the rest of the team for running this event. This has been fantastic, and I'll hand it to Josh for a little bit more about upcoming events.
Well, thank you, Shreya and Charles and McGill. What a fantastic discussion. I've been an entrepreneur for 20 years and a VC for 12, and I learned things from each of you on the discussion. So I hope our other attendees are finding a lot of valuable content there. Very quickly, I know we're about to lose people. I wanted to mention our next upcoming events, online webinars. The first is August 11th. That is entitled Discussing the Black Experience in Technology and Entrepreneurship. On August 24th is another online webinar called Radical Innovation, Audacious Entrepreneurial Thinking. And that'll be featuring David Jen of Google X, a Tufts alum from O2, and moderated by Lou Pelosi from the Tufts Entrepreneurship Center. Details and registration are coming. You'll find them in at Tufts online. Just go to the Tufts Entrepreneurship Center website, and in the coming days you'll find registration links for those. Thank you to the TEC, the Tufts Entrepreneurship Center, Tufts Entrepreneurial Network, that is now running these online events. The Amplify team here in San Francisco, Amy, and the Alumni Relations team, the tech services team. And with that, thank you, good evening, stay safe and healthy, and we'll see you on August 11th and August 24th.